Hello and welcome to this View on VOA co-production. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the Republican majority House of Representatives have launched an investigation this week into the Biden administration's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in August 2021. Immigration experts and also the U.S. military personnel who assisted in the evacuation have testified that the chaotic pullout was actually due to decades of bad decision-making. The Voice of America's congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson gets more details.
The final days of the U.S. conflict in Afghanistan were marked by chaos and death, as the rapid advance of the Taliban caught the U.S. military and State Department by surprise.
Because of the Biden administration's dereliction of duty, the world watched heartbreaking scenes unfold in and around the Kabul airport for the next 2 weeks.
Congressional Republicans are leading an investigation into the events of August 2021. Democrats argue that the groundwork for the chaotic withdrawal was laid by previous presidential administrations.
In the years preceding the 2021 withdrawal, the decision to engage in the direct negotiations with the Taliban at the exclusion of the Afghan government and the invitation to meet at Camp David conferred international legitimacy to the Taliban.
Congress is also asking why there is a backlog in processing visas for the tens of thousands of Afghans promised safety in return for assisting U.S. forces. Peter Lucier works for Team America Relief, an organization that has helped support evacuation efforts.
This is not the story of a Biden failure or a Trump failure. This is a story of an American failure and the effect it has had and continues to have on Afghans.
Ultimately, about 122,000 people were airlifted out of Afghanistan in the days before the handover to the Taliban. But the immigration status for those Afghans who made it to the U.S. is still uncertain, and tens of thousands remain trapped in Afghanistan.
We wept as we listened to messages left by children pleading for our help.
U.S. service members also testified that unclear rules of engagement at Kabul airport left them defenseless and alleged that ultimately led to the August 26 bombing, the deadliest day for Americans in Afghanistan in 10 years.
The withdrawal was a catastrophe, in my opinion, and there was an inexcusable lack of accountability and negligence. The 11 Marines, 1 sailor, and 1 soldier that were murdered that day have not been answered for.
U.S. lawmakers say the secretaries of state and defense will soon be asked to testify about their department's roles in the evacuation. Katherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
All right, now this, of course, is an issue that we will continue to talk about. And to give us more analysis is Voice of America's Jessica Stone. She's joining us live from the White House in Washington, D.C. Now, Jessica, the United Nations is said to be considering to reduce aid to Afghanistan amidst growing calls for a tougher response to Taliban's restrictions on Afghan women. What's Washington's position in this?
Well, Washington does back that position. In fact, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said this week that the Taliban simply can't roll back women's rights and expect to get support from the international community. But it's clear that Washington doesn't want to do it by itself. It does want to build consensus in the international community for that position. And so this week we saw the United Nations Assistance Mission to Afghanistan chief testifying before the UN Security Council, basically saying that Afghanistan is the absolute worst place in the world to be a woman. Right. In fact, she said it's the most repressive country in the world, arguing that half of the workforce is women, and that really hurts the economy. Of course, in December, Afghanistan banned women from working in NGOs, and it is the only country in the world that does not allow women to have an education. The UN mission is asking for $4.62 billion to address the humanitarian need because roughly 2/3 of the population, they estimate, are food insecure, housing insecure, but there is this tension, of course, between holding the Taliban accountable for promises it has made not only to the people of Afghanistan but to the international community, and continuing to provide the much needed humanitarian aid in that country. And so it will be a consensus effort, in short.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, another issue that I want to talk to you about is in neighboring Pakistan. It has announced that it is hosting counter-terrorism talks with the United States next week. What more can you tell us on this?
Well, we know this. It's a two-day meeting taking place in Islamabad, and a senior counterterrorism official from the State Department is traveling there for the meetings. It's going to focus on border security and countering financial terrorism. I'm sure you're aware of the tremendous economic hardships that are going on in Pakistan right now. The U.S. is encouraging Pakistan to find agreement with the IMF, in fact, to get this loan that they need to restart this $6.5 billion loan program. But they do have to make a lot of adjustments to their economy. They have to remove subsidies and liberalize their currency rate. And all of this plays in, of course, to the terrorism picture because the Pakistanis are very concerned that Afghanistan has become not only a place that can harbor terrorists inside Afghanistan, but in the region. And they have recently traveled to Kabul to warn them about that. So all of these things playing into the calculation. And what's more, there's additional pressure, of course, because we are just a couple of weeks away from Ramadan. So the families in Pakistan are going to have even more day-to-day pressure to make sure they can prepare that meal to break the fast each day.
Absolutely, indeed. Jessica, do continue to stay on with us because I want you to weigh in on another important story. And this, of course, has got to do with China's Belt and Road Initiative that promised to vastly improve infrastructure, connecting people of various developing nations and also to promote commerce. But apart from widely reported delays, the project has also had a bit of a hidden cost and also some unintended impact on the local people, as reported by Voice of America's Ahadian Utama in Jakarta, Indonesia. Take a look at this report.
Every day for the past 2 years, Heru Sutanto says he has felt anxious. He lives in Padalarang, a city in the Indonesian province of West Java, situated some 136 kilometers from the nation's capital, Jakarta.
This is what I'm really worried about. If it shifts, the roof will also fall. That's why we don't use this room. I have 2 rooms that are not being used for my children's bedrooms. Rather than being at risk, it's better to sleep in the living room.
Sutanto's house is about 150 meters from the construction of a tunnel. That's slightly longer than a soccer field. The tunnel is a part of the Jakarta-Bandung High-Speed Rail project, a landmark project for China's Belt and Road Initiative. The project aims to connect 2 of the region's population centers, Jakarta and Bandung, through high-speed rail. The housing complex where Sutanto lives is just west of Bandung. The tunnel construction impacts him and more than 100 other families who live in this complex.
The construction process uses blasting techniques so that it has an impact on the damage to the residential houses.
Residents have tried several times to voice their concerns to officials with the Indonesia-China High-Speed Rail project, known by their Indonesian acronym KCIC, a consortium formed by Indonesian and Chinese state-owned enterprises. But the residents say the KCAC has not followed up. The consortium also did not respond to VOA's request for comment. At the beginning of the project in 2016, the initial cost was $5.5 billion. 75% of that amount was borrowed from the China Development Bank. Indonesian state-owned enterprises took on 15% of the cost, and the rest was provided by the Chinese consortium of state-owned enterprises. However, costs swelled to more than $6 billion and is expected to increase again to just under $8 billion due to overrun costs, according to an official with Indonesia's coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. Transportation analysts say this development has put Indonesian President Joko Widodo's government in an uncomfortable position.
The choice for the government is to keep completing it, even though the economic consequences will be a lifetime budget burden. If they stop, it would probably become an abandoned project for life as well.
Some residents are pushing for the project because it will drastically cut the travel time between Jakarta and Bandung. Ahmad Rashad lives on the outskirts of Jakarta and travels to and from Bandung weekly for work.
It normally takes up to 4 hours, but with high-speed train, I hope it can reduce to 1 until 2 hours.
But even rail supporters are disappointed by project delays. The high-speed train was to begin operating in 2019, but that has been moved back to 2023. Back in Padalarang, Sutanto and his neighbors wonder how much longer their homes can withstand the constant drilling. Ahadian Utama, VOA News, Jakarta, Indonesia.
And also to tell us more, we still have Jessica Stone from the Voice of America. She's still with us. Jessica, now this week, top American security officials testified before the Congress about the top global threats to the United States and also on the issue of global terrorism, which was no longer the top of the list. Instead, it was China and Russia that held the top spot. So what are the reasons behind this?
Well, we are seeing a shift in the U.S. national security assessment and in the community, really, from a focus on fighting global terrorism to a focus on the challenges posed by major competition with both China and Russia. And that was outlined during a hearing this week by a U.S. National Security Director, Avril Haines, who said China is the most consequential threat to U.S. national and economic security. And she talked more about how the U.S. views Xi Jinping as an insular leader who has surrounded himself with only agreeable voices, who has created an echo chamber. And of course, on Friday in the National People's Congress, he did get certified for that third term. The party, she says, sees itself as only capable of a global rise as the U.S. power around the world diminishes. And I would note that Chinese President Xi Jinping made rare public confrontational remarks, of course, earlier this week about the U.S. and about its intent, he says, to encircle China and limit its rise. And this has been a recurring theme during his presidency. That came just ahead of Foreign Minister Qin Gang, who had his also further controversial and confrontational remarks about the United States and its intents. But U.S. national security officials also very keen on the link between Russia and China. We're still waiting for more intelligence about those links, but the U.S. is maintaining at this point that the Chinese are supporting the war effort, if not in overt ways, in covert ways.
Absolutely indeed. Now, one other very interesting aspect, which I'm pretty sure has been discussed a lot even within the United States, is about the national security officials who were pressed this week on why there remains so much disagreement within American intelligence community on the origins of the COVID-19 virus. What have you learned about this? Because this is something that we've heard about repeatedly within the American intelligence community, but there's still very little clarity on it.
Yeah, it's clear that members of Congress, like much of the American public and probably a lot of people around the world, are very frustrated by the dissonance inside the American intelligence community. You've got the FBI and the Energy Department now assessing that the lab leak theory, essentially the idea that the COVID virus was inadvertently linked from the Wuhan lab where they were doing coronavirus experimentation and research, and where they did do gain-of-function research, which makes viruses even more lethal and easily spread. That is only shared by those two agencies, though. The majority of U.S. national security agencies either have no conclusion or they say it's more likely to have been passed between an animal and a human. And Director Avril Haines, who again, as I mentioned earlier, testified on Capitol Hill, says, look, if China would cooperate with the global investigation into the origins of this pandemic, we would have more information and we could likely come to a conclusion. So she really laid the feet at the Chinese government. But of course, U.S. national security agencies have different theories about this and different ways of approaching it. One key thing that we did learn from that hearing, though, is this. If there was an animal to human transmission, Mohammed, more likely than not, China could provide or produce that animal as they did in the SARS pandemic. I would just
indeed,
remind
Jessica, we'll have to
our
interrupt
audience
you
that
there
has not
because
happened.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica, for joining us and getting us all those details there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.